So ever since I was young, I've always been very obsessed with optimizing everything when it comes to my personal finances. Like before I even had any money, I was always very obsessed about reading about things like investing or credit cards and how much different things cost and things like this. I went through a period when I was trying to spend as little money as possible because I was always thinking about like, I just want to save as much money as possible for the future. And then I also went through a phase sort of like last year when I was spending a lot more, when I was a lot more about just spending money in the moment and like enjoying the money that I was now finally making. But now I think I've gone to the point where I'm sort of in the middle of these things, and I've realized that life is not about saving as much as possible, and it's also not about spending as much as possible because you also want to save for your future. But what it really comes down to is the value that you're getting relative to the cost. So essentially what I'm now optimizing for nowadays is the value to cost ratio. And as I've now lived either full-time or part-time in 4 different countries in the world, I realized just how big a factor the location that you decide to live in plays in this value to cost equation. And it's not just about differences in cost of living either. There's so much more to this. So in this video, I want to go through the 5 main ways that living internationally has allowed me to not only optimize my finances, but optimize my life as well. So I get absolutely the most for my money at any given time and for any given thing that I spend my money on. So the first key realization, and this is really the foundational thing to all of this, is geographic arbitrage. And this simply refers to the fact that, well, in the past, the way it would work is that you would work in one place, you would essentially earn your money in one place, and then you would spend your money in the same location. So you would go to work in some office in some city, and that would have to be the same city where you live. But nowadays, with the rise of the internet, this no longer has to be the case. Nowadays, you can, and most people don't realize this, but you can do this. You can earn your money in one location and spend your money in another location. What's happened throughout history, now that we've got to this world where you've got these big corporations where most of the like traditional high-paying jobs are, most of these are going to be concentrated in a couple of locations. You think about New York, about London, you think about San Francisco and things like this. Because of the fact that over the past generation, every ambitious person would essentially gravitate to these same locations for these best money-making opportunities. That has also led the cost of living as well as the taxes in these specific locations to go up so much that it's no longer necessarily the case that working a job in London is even better than working the same job in a different location, even if that different location has ostensibly lower earnings, because your cost of living in that place is going to be so much lower as well. But where you can really optimize today is if you have a business that is online, that is location independent, where you can earn your money in one market, so in one currency. In my case, that's the US and the US dollar mainly. And then live and base yourself in a completely different location that is not crazily overinflated yet, like a lot of these sort of traditional hubs where people gravitate to. And this is really the first way I've been able to optimize my life. The second benefit that this gives you, which is the second point I want to talk about, is you can absolutely optimize your taxes. In some cases, even completely eliminate your taxes. And this is another thing where most of us are just conditioned to believe like, oh, you're just supposed to pay your taxes. And absolutely, if you live in a place, you're supposed to absolutely pay the taxes that you're supposed to pay by law in that location. Don't ever try to evade taxes, don't do anything illegal. But what most of us don't realize is that you have no obligation to keep living in the particular place where you were born if you're not happy with what you're getting in terms of value for the cost. And by the way, the cost includes not just cost of living, but also and especially taxes. So the way I look at taxes, and this might change your perspective on taxes entirely, it's sort of like a subscription that you pay to access the totality of what you get for your money in a particular place. And just like if you have, let's say, a Disney Plus subscription and you're seeing like, okay, Disney Plus is giving me absolute trash for my money, you wouldn't just stay subscribed to Disney Plus because one day you decided like, oh, I'm gonna subscribe to Disney Plus. No, you can unsubscribe from Disney Plus and go subscribe to Netflix instead or whatever, or not be subscribed to anything if you don't want to. And this is how I view taxes. If I'm not happy with paying 45% tax in the UK, then guess what? I can just move out of the UK, which to me is like I'm unsubscribing from the service of the UK. and instead going to a different place like the UAE, which is where I'm mainly based in nowadays, where I get the most for my taxes. Yes, they have introduced some taxes here, and even if I had to pay the 9% corporate tax that they've introduced, I would be fine with that because the value that I'm getting relative to what I'm paying to me is really good. So I'm not saying that you should just go out there to try to pay as little tax as possible. But what I am saying is that you should look at where do you get the most for your money, and if you're not happy with what you're getting, look into moving. Because unless you're a US citizen, you can just move and not pay taxes in most cases. If you're a US citizen, you'll still have to pay federal taxes to the US because they have a citizenship-based taxation. But in every other case, you can just leave and look at the world and see where you get the most. If you're looking to move to Dubai specifically, I recommend that you book a call with me down below. I can walk you through the entire process so that we can make sure that you do this properly. So point number 3 of how I've optimized my finances by living internationally is on the investing side. So just like you don't have to live in one place just because you happen to be born there, you also don't have to invest in whatever country you happen to be born. Let's say I want to buy property. If I'm like most people, I'm just looking at the local market where I am based. If I'm from Finland, which I am, and I was like most Finnish people, I would just be thinking about like, okay, what is the property market in Finland? Or these are the prices, this is the rent I can get. Okay, this is just how it is. Whereas now that I have a global perspective and I've just opened my eyes to the entire world, I've realized that in most cases, there's nothing stopping me from buying property in the UK or the UAE or the US. Now, in some cases, there are going to be restrictions on that. Specifically, a lot of Asian countries aren't really as easy. There's like hoops you have to jump through and things like this. And of course, this requires you to like have an understanding of that market and things like this. But chances are that the best rates you can get on your property investments, for example, don't happen to be in whatever place you're born in. So what I'm looking at now is not just cities within a country like most people do, but I'm able to look at cities in the entire world and decide not only where would I like to buy property from a lifestyle perspective, where I might want to live, but also from an investment point of view. And this applies to stocks, this applies to all kinds of investments. This applies to where you hold your money in terms of your banking. Different countries have different interest rates. So point number 3 is investing. Now, point number 4, we're getting closer more into like lifestyle and things like this. One thing I've always had as like a thing that I'm always willing to spend money on is travel. Even when I was a student, I was always traveling around and things like this. But really what I've realized over time, now that I've visited like 20 countries or something like that, that my best trips are when I'm able to stay in a place for much longer than just like the typical holiday that most people do. Most people have like a week holiday somewhere that they save an entire year for because they're paying all the taxes and crazy cost of living in their home country and they can't afford any more than that. And then they go on a trip to the Swiss Alps for like a week or something, and that's their like one trip for the family for the year. That to me sounds like a horrible way to travel. What I much prefer is being able to go to a place and stay there for a month. I just stayed in Thailand for a full month a couple of months ago. And in most people's cases, if you're living like most people, where you're based in one country, you have a mortgage house in one country, staying in a different country for a full month would be very expensive, because the thing is, your travel expenses would always be on top of your normal living expenses in your home country, because you're always paying rent there anyway. Whereas if you have a global perspective, what you can do is, instead of traveling to a place, you can just go and live in that place for a month or 2 months or even 6 months if you want to. So what I did, my rent for my short-term apartment in Dubai expired around May, I believe it was. And then I wanted to go back to the UK for a couple of weeks. So I did that. Then I went to Finland. Then I went to Thailand. Then I went to Singapore. And in all of those times when I was going to those places, I was not paying rent anywhere else. That was my only base at that time. Which meant that rather than having my travel expenses in Thailand being on top of my normal living expenses, they were my only expenses. And what this allows you to do, if this is what you're interested in, and this is what I am planning to do for the next few years, is rather than just having one home in one location like most people do, you can have bases in different places around the world. So my plan is to spend my winter months in Dubai and then spend my summer months probably somewhere in Asia. This summer I'm going traveling around these different countries to like figure out which one will be the right for me. And instead of being a traveler, like a tourist in these places, I'm living in those places. I'm properly getting to experience these places. And this is something that you simply cannot cannot do if you're doing the traditional thing where you just have a job in some office in some physical location. When you have a location independent income, you're able to do this. You're able to experience the world so much more, and it's just one of the most exciting things that I've always wanted from my life. Now, all of these reasons are great, but perhaps the biggest reason of them all, how living overseas has allowed me to completely optimize my finances, is how it will help me to retire much earlier. Let me explain. Now, in most people's cases, when again you're thinking with this tunnel vision, where you're just looking at one country, like the income levels in one country, as well as the expenses in one country, taxes in one country, when you're thinking of how much money you need to retire, what you're always thinking about is, okay, how much do I need to have invested in order to retire with like the 5% rule or the 4% rule or whatever you want to use? But you're only thinking of it in terms of the cost of living of your particular country. Whereas if you're living globally, what it allows you to do is, like, first of all, not only make a bunch more money, because if you have an online business, if you are an online freelancer, chances are your income is going to be above the average person. And also not only spend a lot less money because you can save on taxes, save on cost of living, but also need to save a lot less money in order to retire. Because when you're not building your entire life in just one super high cost of living location, you don't have to think in terms of your nest egg requirement for retirement in terms of the cost of living of that country. You can again look at the world and look at what is the most optimal location for me to retire, and chances are it doesn't have to be a super high cost of living place. And really, this is not even about retirement. The bigger point here is that how much money you need to feel like you are free. Because the way I'm thinking of money is that my number one goal is that I never have to go back to my old life in the corporate world. I just don't want to do that. So what I'm thinking of when I'm growing out my net worth is how much could this money pay me monthly using like the 5 and 4% rule? Because I know that any given time I could go and live in Thailand or Bali for like $1,000, $2,000 a month. That lowers my requirement for my what I call freedom fund, aka the amount of money I know that when I get beyond that level, I'll never have to go back to the corporate world, because I can always just live on the interest of that money, and it gives me the option to not have to work, or it gives me unlimited runway to try again if my current businesses fail or something like that. I just see this as just a perfect way to live, at least for me personally. Let me know what I missed. Let me know any other ways that you, perhaps if you're doing something similar to this, are able to optimize your finances. I also recommend you follow me on Instagram for a lot of pictures and stories about my travels, about my life around the world and what I'm doing. And so if you're looking for the specifics on how I'm able to save so much money while living this seemingly sort of adventurous, like crazy lifestyle around the world, I made this video where I show you exactly how I was able to save $150,000 in just 1 year on an income that most people would probably not save that much money at all.